Barry Season 2 picks up right after the events of Barry's unraveling in Season 1. He was forced to kill his army friend Chris, along with Detective Janice Moss. He had feared that his friend Chris was going to rat him out, so he killed him. And also, Janice Moss, she was on him throughout the whole season. She had a feeling it was him. She had an inkling it was him. That's why she didn't want to get into a relationship with Gene. But she figured it out. She had him dead to rights, and he had the gun hiding behind the tree, so he killed her. But, in his opinion, he is a hitman out of the game starting now. The first scene we get in Season 2 is with Fuchs' new hitman attempting to pull a job for a new client. Things go smoothly at first, as he kills both of the men in the apartment. The struggle happens, however, when he realizes he was given the wrong combination to the safe that he was attempting to crack open. He decides to shoot the safe at point-blank range. The bullet ricochets off, gets him in the leg. Not good news for Fuchs, who is learning that replacing a hitman is not as easy as he thought. The new hitman then shows up to the motel where Fuchs and the new client are waiting. There's sirens blaring behind him, and that should be an obvious sign that something went horribly wrong. Fuchs doesn't seem to notice this. He casually opens the door and tells the new client, "You gave us the wrong code." Out of nowhere, the new hitman is killed by police. Fuchs then plays innocent, puts his hands up, and surrenders. Enter Barry for the first time this season, as his acting class is in disarray from Gene missing with his girlfriend Janice presumed dead. Barry convinces the class that the show must go on, and he says he will direct, basically denying Janice's death, trying to keep hope that she's alive, and he's trying to put all this in the past and move on with his new life. Now we are shown what NoHo Hank is up to. Hank is loving the new truce he has made with the Bolivians. He says they are super great at acquiring cargo, while Hank's team is really good at repackaging said cargo. To Hank, all is well. The bromance between Cristobal, the Bolivian boss, and Hank, the acting U.S. Chechnyan boss, has grown even more since Goran was murdered by Barry, going so far as to call Cristobal Baby Tony Robbins. All is going well for Hank until Esther, head of the Burmese crime family, shows up. Hank doesn't like her sight immediately because apparently she is his biggest competitor. Cristobal sees a very big opportunity here for all three of these families to work together. She says she has a monastery that allows her to bring whatever she wants into the country, including heroin. Cristobal has been wanting to get heroin into the rotation of the illegal goods they are dealing, so he wants to bring her on board. Esther says that her and her team would provide smugglers and assassins, while Hank and Cristobal would provide a safe house as storage for all their stolen goods that they are going to sell. Hank says his Chechnyan men are already great soldiers, while Cristobal kind of laughs it off. Then, out of nowhere, Esther decides to stab herself in the hand to show how tough she is, pretty much ending the debate on who is more badass. Hank is now forced to work with his biggest enemy. He has no choice because Cristobal has already made up his mind. Barry then checks in on Gene at the perfect time. Gene is being interviewed by the police, and he is telling them that he is convinced that Janice is not dead. He thinks she might be out there missing, or maybe she is dead and her body's just out there, so he wants the cops to just keep searching the grounds. Detective John Loach, who is Janice's former partner, he's convinced that the Chechnyans killed her or took her, and that there's no reason to search the ground because he is sure that she is dead. Then we go back to Hank's stash house. He receives a bullet in the mail as a threat. The Chechnyan bosses back in Chechnya believe that the Bolivians killed Goran and that Hank is now working with them, so that would make Hank a traitor. Hank then comes up with an idea to get him and Barry out of this situation. Blame the murder on Esther. Hank shows up as a master in disguise to Lululemon, Barry's job, to tell him about the situation. He wants Barry to kill Esther to tie up all the loose ends, because Hank did give Barry the heads up that Goran was trying to kill him, basically taking Barry's side over Goran and letting Barry kill Goran. Barry also saved Fuchs in this act. Oddly, Barry has no time for this, telling Hank he doesn't fucking care, and he also calls him an idiot, and he demands him to leave his workplace. We then see Fuchs being questioned by police, and they also get DNA from a Coke can that he was sipping, saying that he has no problem complying with the law. Back to the acting class. They are ready to put on the show, as ready as they can be without Gene, and then all of a sudden, Gene shows up. Gene then says to the crowd that is sitting there waiting for the show to begin, "I wasn't here to oversee this production, so I cannot allow this play to go on with my name attached to it." Gene also tells his class that he will be shutting it down and closing the class for good. But Barry pleads with him to stop and think about this. Gene then counters, saying talking about Janice right now would be just as hard as you talking about the first time you killed a man in the Army. Within seconds, Barry starts recalling this moment. He starts setting up the scene of the first time he killed someone in battle. Gene, seeing what is happening, motions for two classmates to go on stage and to reenact the story as it was told by Barry. Although Barry does hide how he really felt after killing 3 men with a sniper from 700 yards out. He feels like he belongs, and he loves the feeling. Whereas he's trying to let Gene and his classmates know that he regretted it, and he was acting as if he was a broken man right then and there. Gene is inspired by this, and he agrees to let the class keep going, and tells the class he will see them all tomorrow. As the class exits, Sally walks over to Barry to show her appreciation for him saving the class, but rejects his request to hang out, putting her schedule first, typical Sally. She does assure him, however, that she will find the time to squeeze it in. Hank is then seen waiting by his car in the parking lot, right in plain view of the entire acting class. This moment makes Barry immediately angry as he charges over to Hank, but this is not the fun-loving Hank we know. He's gone in this moment. He demands Barry kill Esther, or he will tell the Chechnyans who actually killed Goran, and then says the Chechnyan mob will kill him and anyone else he loves. This really shocks Barry to his core. I'm sure Barry had regretted his earlier meeting with Hank, thinking that he could have done this a better way. But here we are. Hank then ends the conversation by saying, "Don't fuck with me, Barry. It's not polite." And then he drives off listening to pop music. Remember the Coke can? Well, it turns out the DNA matched the tooth that they found in the garage Goran was murdered in. The tooth belongs to Fuchs. Detective May, John's new partner, tells John that Fuchs is from Cleveland. She then leaves the room. John then has a moment of clarity, thinking back to all the times that Janice was suspicious of Barry. Now he is starting to think the shadowy image they received of the suspect, the only evidence they have of the suspect, looks a lot more like Barry than he initially thought. Episode 2 opens with Hank taking Barry to Esther's monastery. He wants to show him the operation, to show him what he's up against. He explains how her crew applies for religious asylum, and that's how they can fly under the radar and bring in the drugs and money and equipment and everything they need, and that's how they go under the radar, and that's how her operation works, which is why Cristobal wants to work with her. Barry kind of says this is very smart, actually, and you can tell Hank is jealous right away as he pulls out a picture of them looking happy on the phone. And basically for Hank, the whole thing is just so Esther dies so he can be best friends with Cristobal again. He then shows him the bullet that the Bolivians gave him, and he tells Barry he wants her to kill her with this bullet specifically, and then to retrieve the bullet, then send the bullet back to the Bolivians so that Hank can be cleared from this mess. Barry questions how this is possible, and then Hank says, well, why don't you get a heavy book behind her and then shoot her in the head, catch the bullet, there you go. Barry says this isn't really how bullets work, but Hank really wants this hit to be known that it was from him. So either way, he wants him to kill him with this bullet. Barry then looks right at Hank and he says, am I evil? Hank pauses for a moment and says, absolutely. Do I not tell you enough? You are like the most evil guy I know. Well, while funny, this isn't the answer that Barry is looking for. The entire theme in this episode is that Barry is struggling with the fact that he is still a killer, and he wants to get past this and live his life with Sally. The acting class is then shown giving their personal stories, because Barry's story touched them so much. And this also revitalizes Gene's mood, because now he wants to make a show based on this. He wants everyone to perform their own most personal tragedy, and they will have a show based on this. And he thinks that it will sell better than the past shows they have been doing. Instead of going, Sally stands up and leaves because she has to go and see her agent. The next scene, we see Barry talking to Gene, trying to talk him out of doing his Afghanistan story. Again, the theme of this episode. He doesn't want to be involved with murder anymore. So then Gene says no, but then Barry says, well, what if I do the story about meeting you? Gene is instantly interested, so at first he goes along with this. Back to Sally. They are showing the reel of her most recent shots. She doesn't like anything she sees because she thinks she could be doing more at this point in her career. Her agents try to calm her down and say that good parts come with time. Even Jennifer Lawrence didn't make it big right away. Detective Joe then travels to Cleveland to question Fuchs about the tooth they found in the garage where Goran was killed. Fuchs immediately comes up with a story saying he spent a night with a girl and she must have taken it, and he was thinking about calling the cops about this. Obviously, Detective Joe does not like this story, and he tells him, look, I don't care about Goran either. I just want to know who killed my partner. Basically offering him a plea deal right then and there. As long as he helps him catch the killer of Janice, he will let him go for everything else. Barry then heads home and gets a special bullet ready to kill Esther with. Looking depressed that he has to go through with this again. Same theme. Gene then changes his mind on Barry changing his story and insists he does the Afghanistan story, no ifs, ands, or buts. Next scene, we get the confrontation with Barry and the Burmese family. Barry walks up to the door, and he could have easily shot Esther dead right then and there. He has a sudden flashback to Afghanistan, and then a sudden flashback to Sally, saying she will never be with a violent man ever again. This breaks Barry in this moment. He is unable to go through with the hit. He backs out, slowly walks away, and then unknowingly walks into a room full of the Burmese crime family members. Everyone looks kind of confused in the moment. Then Barry runs away. They chase him down the street. Barry gets in his car. They take shots out of his car, causing Barry's car to swerve and crash, and then he gets out and runs away. In the final scene, Fuchs is waiting for him outside of his home, acting wildly suspicious the entire time. He then frantically asks Barry if he killed a cop, promising if he did, he could help him make it go away. Then Barry keeps his mouth shut. He doesn't like the situation and tells Fuchs to leave. In the final shot, we see Fuchs from Joe's security footage trying to get Barry to confess. Fuchs has officially turned. Episode 3 kicks off with Hank having a dream about Thomas Friedman, who Cristobal mentioned in Episode 1 as he was trying to convince Hank to work with Esther. Cristobal mentioned Friedman's McDonald's theory. The more rational explanation of this phenomenon is that countries with McDonald's in them tend to be more economically developed and open to trade. Hank tells Friedman that you are bad at writing and nobody likes you. Hank then wakes up with the book on his chest as a henchman walks in and says Cristobal needs to talk to you right now. Hank eagerly gets out of bed and goes up to Cristobal, hoping while asking if something happened to Esther. Hank's plan backfired because he turns around and sees Esther standing right there. Cristobal then offers the safe house as a sanctuary for her crew. Hank and his men are forced to go stay in a storage unit. Now we pop in on Barry and Sally writing their stories. Both are struggling at the time. Barry is still struggling with the fact that he is lying to his classmates. He deletes a hilarious sentence, "The first time I killed someone was the best day of my life," and then frantically hits the delete button. Sally then tries to calm him, saying writing about her ex has been therapeutic. She's writing about how her ex was abusive, particularly when she stood up to him and left. Barry is just finding out about this and didn't know that she had an abusive ex-boyfriend. He worriedly asks, "He choked you?" He is not okay with this. Gene then goes to visit his son, trying to repair the relationship still. He offers his son a key to his cabin. Neither are okay with the idea of staying at the house that Gene's girlfriend was killed. His son says, "I don't want the cabin where your girlfriend was murdered. That's sick." At least Gene and his son are on somewhat of speaking terms. Back to Barry's apartment, where Sally is talking to her friend Beth about writing a scene about Sam. They are talking about the night she left specifically, but her friend has a way different memory of what happened. She says, "I remember you showing up to my house with welts on your neck, and then we went, he was sleeping on his couch, we got your stuff, and we got out of there." Sally then says, "No, don't you remember I said, you want to choke me, you coward? Well, choke on this. I'm out of here." Her friend does not seem to remember this. Back to Barry, who is now in his room, trying to change his story from the first time he took a life to the first time he saved a life. This is the common theme throughout the first 3 episodes. He is still having a hard time dealing with his past as he tries to move forward. He's having flashbacks about the war, and all of a sudden, a bullet goes right by his face and into the wall. He seems very confused by this. He hurries up and goes and grabs his guns hiding under his bed and looks out the window and sees Hank along with another member of the Chechnyan mob. Barry ends up shooting Hank's partner and then quickly scurries out of the house to go and stop the situation before it gets worse. He could have killed Hank right in this moment. Hank even tells him to. He says, "Listen, I'm dead anyway." Barry decides not to because of their past relationship that they had. Barry even seems more mad at Hank for doing this while Sally was in the apartment than the fact that he actually tried to get Barry killed. Barry then tells Hank, "I cannot work for you anymore. I do not want to do this." Hank pleads with him to do something. He then says, "Just find another hitman." Hank comes back with, "What do you want me to do? Go to the John Wick Hotel?" He's trying to tell Barry that it's not easy finding someone as good as Barry is at doing his job. Barry then comes up with a compromise. He says he will train the Chechnyans, but will no longer do hits for Hank. Hank gets very excited by this because he can then go back to being 50-50 partners with Cristobal. Barry even says, "Why not take it all for yourself?" Hank then starts dancing, saying 50-50 with Cristobal. All he wants is Esther out of the picture as soon as possible. Barry then runs back into his house and tries to clean up the room before Sally comes back in and notices. There are bullets in the wall and a lot of feathers everywhere from pillows getting hit by bullets. Sally walks in before he finishes cleaning, but she doesn't even notice anything. She's so wrapped up in the conversation she just had with Beth that she doesn't even notice. She's asking Barry to help her with her writer's block, as she just tried to help him. The two actually have a lot in common in this moment, as they are both telling untruths about their stories. Sally didn't really stand up for herself like she claims, and Barry enjoyed the killing, which is why he's trying to change the scene to the time he saved a life, not took a life. We get to the scene where Barry is training Hank's army. No one knows what they're doing, and Hank says, "How long until we're a good army? 2 to 3 hours?" One person in particular in Hank's crew that actually has a bit of talent. He's hitting shots, and he looks like he can be a good assassin. Back to the acting class. Sally and Jean both want Barry to play Sally's abusive ex, Sam. Barry does not like this idea. He keeps thinking about the moment where Sally said she will never be with an aggressive man ever again. He is really struggling with the idea of being violent towards Sally. He's already so pissed off at the fact that she was in an abusive relationship in the past. He is then pushed too hard by Jean and Sally to do the scene, screams "fuck off," and runs out. Sally chases after Barry and tries to apologize for pushing him too hard into something that he does not want to do. All of a sudden, Sam, her abusive ex-boyfriend, shows up and says hello. Suddenly, Barry looks like he wouldn't mind killing again after all. Episode 4 picks up with Barry, Sally, and Sam all out to dinner. Barry seems very uncomfortable in this moment, sitting across from the man who has physically harmed the woman that he is in love with. Sally is being very cordial to Sam, and Sam is acting like Mr. Nice Guy. Sam eventually pays for the dinner, and the scene switches to the acting class. At the acting class, Barry confronts Sally for being polite to Sam at the dinner. He points out to the script saying that she never wants to see him again. But at dinner, she was being overly nice and even thanked Sam for paying. At first, Sally says she was just being nice, but then she has a breakdown. She admits that she never stood up to Sam and that her scene is basically bullshit. He left, but she never stood up for herself like she writes. She then says she should change her play, but Barry comforts her and gives her the confidence to do the play, saying that it is okay to have secrets. Back to Fuchs' hotel. John is lining the room with wires in an attempt to catch Barry admitting to a crime. Barry calls Fuchs, asking for a new movie to rip off for his scene, saying Braveheart was too popular. John asks Fuchs to have Barry come over to the hotel to speak in person. Quick check-in on Jean and his son. His son dropped off strawberries for Jean, showing a huge improvement in their relationship. Jean is beyond happy here in this moment. Sally is then seen practicing her lines for her upcoming scene. As Barry watches on, he catches Sam spying on Sally when she specifically asked him not to watch this scene. Sam then flees the studio. Barry follows him out. He tells him never to come back. The two go back and forth, but right before Sam drives off, he tells Barry to not forget that he had her first when she was tight. This puts Barry into a fit of rage. Sam then calls Sally, asking her to come to his hotel so he can give her a present, as he is leaving LA tonight. She agrees, but she does not feel comfortable. At the same time, we see Barry burst into his apartment and leave quickly with a gun. He then hops in his car to go visit Sam. Sam has Sally come up to his hotel room, making her more uncomfortable than she already is. Sam then gives Sally a playbill from high school and compliments her on the performance and her most recent success. He is basically trying to butter her up here so that she will not go through with her play. He fears that this will bash his name and his family will hate him for it. She says she's still going to do the play, but she can change his name. This is still not okay with Sam, as he hit the wall right next to her head, making Sally want to leave even more. As she opens the door to leave, we see Barry pointing a gun right at Sam. But no one notices this because of the argument going on between Sally and Sam. Sally leaves, Barry leaves, and he goes to his car and freaks out for what he almost just did. He calls Fuchs. Fuchs tells him to never contact him again and to not come to his hotel, basically warning him that he has turned and he doesn't want to rat him out anymore. Barry then visits Jean and has a talk about the war. He has hid this secret since the beginning of the series, and he asks Jean if he can tell it to him, but is worried that Jean will look at him differently after this. Jean tells him that he can trust him. Barry goes on to tell him the story of when his Marine buddy Arthur got shot in the face. This put Barry back into pure rage mode, and he went to the closest house where he saw a witness shut the door, thinking this was the person who shot his friend. He burst into the house, and without thinking, shoots this man to death. The other Marines near him told him that this was not the man who had shot Arthur. The officers above him pulled some strings and got Barry honorably discharged. Jean says he basically got away with murder and to never tell this to anyone again. Jean does go on to comfort Barry, saying he is not a monster, and just because of past mistakes, it doesn't mean he can't change. And he has seen change in Barry. This makes Barry extremely happy, so he goes to visit Fuchs against his wishes. When he gets there, Fuchs is attempting to escape the hotel by climbing out of the window. Barry notices this and asks him to go inside so they can talk. Barry goes on to tell Fuchs about the conversation with Jean. Fuchs is trying very hardly here to get Barry to be quiet, but Barry is in such a good mood, so he goes on to do it. He admits to killing Janice on tape. Joe then bursts in, pointing his gun at Barry. He tells Fuchs to leave so that they can talk together. Barry thinks he is caught red-handed and everything is done at this moment. But then things change. Joe shows a picture of Ronnie Proxon to Barry. This is the man who his wife left him for. He says, "Kill Ronnie and this all goes away." Barry, shocked by this, replies with the episode title. What? Episode 5 is definitely the most self-contained episode in the season. Barry is now in another situation where he finds himself being used as a hitman. As Detective Joe told him in the last episode, kill Ronnie, the man Joe's wife left him for, and all is forgiven. He would no longer try and take him down for the murder of Janice Moss. We're then shown Ronnie, Barry's intended target. He pulls into his driveway and walks into his house carrying a six-pack of Budweiser. Barry catches Ronnie by surprise, but Ronnie does not seem to be intimidated in this moment at all. Barry asks him a few questions, including confirming his name, Ronnie Proxon. Otherwise, for Barry, as he says, may have been awkward. Ronnie calmly complies with all of Barry's questions. Barry then goes to find that Ronnie has relatives in Chicago and comes up with the following plan. He admits to Ronnie that he has been sent there to kill him. He does go on to reiterate that he will not be doing that. He wants Ronnie to go and stay with his relatives in Chicago for at least a year. He even offers him money for any inconvenience this may have caused. Ronnie, again, complies, walks into the other room. As Barry follows him into the next room, he notices an absurd amount of trophies and medals for Taekwondo. He asks Ronnie who they belong to. Ronnie raises his arm, acknowledging that it is him. As Ronnie starts walking back into his bedroom, he is acting as he is packing up his stuff while Barry is talking, and then out of nowhere, kicks him hard as shit in the stomach, knocking Barry to the ground. Ronnie walks over Barry's body and makes sure he's knocked out. He then decides to get on a phone call. This is where the chaos truly begins, as Barry starts fighting him. He is making comments during the fight, saying that this is not what he wanted to happen, this is not how he wanted things to play out. Both of them are catching many lumps here, as Barry is bloody at this time, and Ronnie's windpipe has been broken. Barry mentions this to Ronnie a few times, but Ronnie keeps attacking him. He eventually passes out because he cannot breathe. At this point, Barry thinks Ronnie is dead. Barry then tries to leave the scene, But just then, Lily, Ronnie's daughter, walks in dressed in taekwondo gear. She warily goes in to check in on her dad. Barry follows her into the room, saying everything is going to be okay, he is not going to hurt her, and that he is just going to take her to Chicago for a little while. He cannot find her. He sees that the window is open and fears she may have fled the scene. Then, Barry starts hearing a sound. He turns around to see Lily in a crouched position, ready for battle. He says he mistook her growls for a dog. Lily attacks Barry and hurts him badly, as Barry does not want to fight her. He ends up getting stabbed a few times. Then, out of sadness, Lily runs away and does a couple flips through her neighbor's yard. Barry goes back to Fuchs, saying he needs to go to the hospital. Fuchs refuses and takes him to a drugstore to get some stitches. As he is stitching Barry up, he gets the news about Lily, that she is still alive. This causes Fuchs to go into a frantic state, driving around looking for her. They find her sitting out front of her house. Fuchs tries to talk to her, but then she climbs up on a tree and hops on the roof and crouches down. Fuchs and Barry both agree at this point that she is not human. It is now nighttime, and Barry wakes up from a nap. At this point, he has been stitched up, to the best of Fuchs' ability anyway. Then, Lily lands on the roof of the car. As the two share screams and speed down the block, they suddenly slam on the brakes. They don't know where she is, and then suddenly, she is in the backseat of the car and latches her teeth on Fuchs' cheeks. She holds him here for a moment, and then releases and runs away, leaving a gaping gash on Fuchs. Now it is Barry's turn to go into the store and to purchase items for Fuchs to help his wounds. Who does he find inside? Ronnie. He is also trying to get items to heal himself. Ronnie, still not doing well, with a broken windpipe, attacks Barry in the store. Barry doesn't fight back at first, and he keeps mentioning the Chicago deal, hoping that everything can go peacefully. Eventually, he has to fight back because he's getting hit too many times. They both end up on the floor. Ronnie stands over Barry with the intentions of landing another blow. Then, he is shot in the face by Detective Loach, the one who came up with this entire plan. Loach then starts accusing that Barry is pointing a gun at him, looking for any excuse to kill Barry. Barry notices what's going on, so he starts to back out. Then, rising up once more, is Ronnie. He catches Loach with one of the most fierce roundhouses in the history of roundhouse kicks, knocking him to the ground. The cops come in and shoot and kill Ronnie. Then they check on Detective Joe, realizing he has been killed by this kick. Barry then escapes the fray, walking out of the back. He goes to Fuchs, waiting in his car. He realizes at this moment that if he gets into the car with Fuchs, he will be back in bed with him, leading to more murders, which is exactly what Barry does not want. As the episode fades to black. Episode 6 opens with Detective John's coworkers going over what happened in the grocery store that ended in John's untimely death. Fuchs and Barry are in a public space talking about what's next. Barry wants to go back to the acting class, while Fuchs wants to continue working with Hank, since the Janet issue has now solved itself. Barry tells Fuchs he is done with him. As Fuchs gets this message, he asks Barry how Jean will feel knowing Barry murdered his girlfriend. The two separate while insulting each other. Barry then finishes up his training for Hank and co. Hank asks if he thinks they are ready as he watches on. Barry notices one of Hank's men actually knows what he is doing, and he's looking pretty good. Barry then says they are as ready as they ever will be. The Chechenians then thank him and send him off. Before he leaves, the one man that has been doing very well tells Barry, "I have a purpose now, and you gave me that." The acting class then continues training for their show. Sally tells Barry that she rewrote her scene because she feels like she needs to tell the truth. Barry supports her. Then the two go inside and do the scene read in front of the class. She feels like she's being judged, so she leaves. Barry then asks Jean if he can skip doing his scene and put his effort into helping Sally do her scene. Jean agrees, since now he knows Barry got away with killing someone while he was a Marine. Fuchs then shows up at Jean's cabin. He follows tire tracks and gets very excited, thinking he's going to get some evidence to use against Barry. The tire tracks then run out, and Fuchs hits a dead end. Barry and Sally practice their scene together. To get in the right mindset, Barry channels what Jean has been preaching to him for a while now, to use real life and use real moments in his acting. The moment that he decides to use to become Sally's ex-boyfriend, Sam, was the two worst moments of his life. The first one was when he was a Marine and he got away with killing someone, as we just mentioned, and the second one was when he killed Jean's girlfriend, Janice. He was really done with killing at this time, and he did not want to have to go through with that, but he had to. So he uses both of these moments to fuel his acting performance. The scene is captivating as Barry reaches new heights in his acting pedigree. Jean pulls him over to the side and compliments him on the performance. Barry doesn't know how to take this, since he funneled the moment that he killed Jean's girlfriend to make this performance better.
Back to Fuchs. He clumsily stumbles around and falls down the side of the hill. When he gets himself together, he notices a sewage drain. He walks over to it, and he thinks he can find something in there. So he decides to walk over to the other side. He finds Janice's car, hidden. Hank is then prepping to go out and use the new training to kill Esther, but the plan is foiled by Esther. Her and Cristobal are waiting around the corner as they attempt to go to the monastery and take out the Burmese family. Cristobal said he is very disappointed as one of his men knocks out Hank. We then see Gene dining alone, looking very upset. He motions a cheers in honor of Janice, as it seems he is finally putting her to rest in his mind. But just then, the camera pans over and we see Fuchs looking on, ready to engage in his next target to use to get back at Barry. Episode 7 opens with Sally having a meeting with her agent Lindsay as she is offered a leading role. Lindsay was at her performance at the acting class and witnessed her scene with Barry. Barry is waiting in the lobby where he meets Michael, Lindsay's boss. He's instantly offered an audition in a movie because Lindsay vouched for his acting. Sally's jealous on the way home because Barry is already moving faster than her at her agency. Gene is filled in on the audition for Barry, and he gets nervous about how many lines he has. Hank and his men are then showed tied up as they are loaded onto a school bus. Hank is trying to talk his way out of this, but Cristobal just watches as they are loaded on. Sally is then offered a role in a TV show, but passes because of the subject matter. Her agency is furious, and she leaves the meeting threatening to leave the agency altogether, saying maybe this isn't a good fit. Barry and Gene practice his lines, and Gene is floored at how important the character is to the role, no matter how silly it sounds. Sally admits to Barry that she is jealous of this opportunity to land a movie role, and tells him that if he does happen to land the job, it will make her 100 times more insane, because she has never read with a director before, as Barry is about to do. Hank and his crew are driven to the middle of nowhere. They are surrounded by Esther and the Burmese family as they pour gasoline all over the bus ready to light it on fire. Meyerbeck, the man who Barry was impressed with, starts breaking everyone out of their chains and escapes the bus to kill one of Esther's men. They continue to all break free and leave the bus as Hank keeps jabbing on with apologies, prepping for death. Led by Meyerbeck, all of Hank's crew escape and nearly kill Esther themselves, but she is able to flee. Hank is the sole person left in the bus as it catches fire, and he is pulled to safety. Meyerbeck then kills the traitor and seemingly takes the leadership role over Hank. Sally has a meeting with Lindsay. She pulled some strings and got her class a 400-seat theater for the production. Barry is waiting on his audition. Gene is not there yet, and then calls him and tells him that a private detective found him and told him he can help find Janice. This private detective is just Fuchs. He then gets on the phone and threatens Barry, right before he reads for the movie. Barry tanks his audition and leaves to chase after Fuchs before anything happens to Gene. Fuchs walks Gene right to the site where Janice is hidden. Points at a tree, hoping Gene will notice the car on his own, and sure enough, he does. Fuchs then uses Gene's phone to call the cops. He acts as Gene on the phone and admits to killing Janice as Gene, trying to pin the murder on Mr. Kusnow. While Barry is racing to get to the scene, he pulls Gene to the trunk, opens it up, and reveals Janice's dead body. Fuchs then moves behind Gene, putting a gun to his head. The 8th and final episode of the season opens with Barry frantically going to the site where Janice was buried in an attempt to save Gene from harm. Fuchs does not pull the trigger, but he does whisper something to Gene before taking off. We won't find out what he said until the end of the episode. Barry gets to the scene and sees Fuchs fleeing, but he does find Gene in one piece, sobbing about finding Janice's body. Barry is then being questioned by police about how he found the car so quickly, the car that they could not find after scouring the woods. He says he heard a lot of sounds, and it led him to Mr. Kusnow, who is now the prime suspect, not Barry. Hank and his crew took over Esther's stash house, but Hank's bosses call him and tell him they are coming to replace him. Hank calls Barry for help, but he refuses. The acting class is now practicing for their show in their new 400-seat theater they were given. Everyone keeps commenting of how big it is. Gene is nowhere in sight, Sally is losing her mind, and Barry doesn't know what to do. Gene is then arrested for the murder of Janice Moss, which makes Barry even more upset. Hank's men are then prepping for a raid, with Meyerbeck leading the way. Then Fuchs shows up, saying he needs an army. The Bolivians and the Burmese family show up for war, as Fuchs sneaks out to go play peacemaker with Cristobal. It seems to work, as Hank and Cristobal make up, but Esther is not amused. Barry and Sally get ready for their scene. Barry seems out of it, so Sally smacks him to try to get him into the place before the scene starts. Sally improvs the scene, flipping the table and embarrassing Barry. He walks off. She gets praise for the scene. Everyone loved it. She does not know how to take this. Gene is then let go. His son came to pick him up and let Barry in on the news that he has been cleared for the murder. Barry had called Gene's phone, but his son answered to let him know what had happened. Turns out, When Barry got to the crime scene, he slipped the pin Hank gave him, which means the debt has been paid in Chechenian. He pinned the murder on them. Barry gets a text from a confused Hank, still not okay with the situation as Barry storms in. Barry shoots Esther in the head, and then the chaos ensues. It's Barry versus the Bolivians, the Chechenians, and the Burmese family, but all he wants is Fuchs dead. Marbek hides Fuchs, not knowing who is after him. Barry continues his onslaught, going room to room, taking out anyone who stands in his way. Marbek then gets into position to shoot whoever comes through the door, but then he sees Barry. This makes him stall. Barry does not stall, and he kills Marbek with no hesitation. But it's too late. Fuchs has escaped. After the battle, the Chechenian boss walks in to find a bullet on Esther's body, the same bullet the Chechenians gave to Hank as a threat. He placed it there to pin the murder of his boss on Esther. Barry, waking from his frantic state, now notices he has killed Marbek, and he realizes when he gets into rage mode, it doesn't matter who is standing in his way, as he has a soft spot for Marbek, and probably did not want to kill him right there. The final scene of the season is Gene laying in bed thinking about Janice. He then remembers what Fuchs had said to him. Barry Berkman did this.
Thank you so much for watching that recap. Shout out to Dan from the podcast Scene Invaders. I'm also on that podcast. For doing the recap, I really appreciate it. If you like the recap, hit a thumbs up. If you don't, hit a thumbs down. Please consider subscribing to this channel. I would really appreciate that. If you know somebody that needs a recap of Barry once Season 3 comes around, please share this recap with them. But once again, thank you so much for checking this out.